They called her military brat behind her back at the Prague Security Academy, dismissing her as just another privileged girl playing soldier. But when armed intruders breached the training facility during final exams, it was 22-year-old Lara Petrova who single-handedly neutralized 3 attackers using close quarters. Battle tactics her father had drilled into her since childhood, while her classmates and instructors cowered in locked rooms. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of the Prague International Security Academy as Lara Petrova adjusted the straps of her tactical vest for the 3rd time. At 22, she stood barely 5'4", with shoulder-length auburn hair that she kept meticulously tucked under her training cap, and green eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of her surroundings with an intensity that made her instructors uncomfortable. Academy was housed in a converted 18th-century fortress on the outskirts of Prague, its thick stone walls now serving to contain the echoes of tactical training rather than defend against siege warfare. Students from across Europe came here to train for careers in private security, law enforcement, and corporate protection. It was considered one of the most prestigious institutions of its kind, with a graduation rate that barely scraped 30%. Lara had been here for 18 months, longer than most students who either washed out or graduated within a year. But her path had been different from the start. While other students formed study groups and bonded over shared struggles, Lara remained largely isolated, carrying the invisible burden of being Colonel Viktor Petrov's daughter. Her father was a legend in Eastern European military circles, Czech Special Forces officer who had served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and half a dozen classified operations that most people would never hear about. His reputation preceded Lara wherever she went, creating an expectation that she either had to live up to or be crushed under. Most people assumed the latter was inevitable. "Military brat," they whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. "Daddy's little soldier. She thinks she's special because of her last name." The comments followed her through the mess hall, the training yards, and the dormitories like a shadow she couldn't shake. The truth was more complicated. Lara had grown up on military bases across Europe, moving every 2 years as her father's assignments changed. She'd learned to fight before she learned to read, not because her father was pushing her toward a military career, but because he understood that a young girl living on bases full of soldiers needed to know how to protect herself. Every evening after dinner, while other children watched cartoons or played video games, Lara would join her father in whatever makeshift training space he could find. Basement storage rooms, empty barracks, abandoned warehouses, anywhere they could practice without drawing attention. He taught her everything: hand-to-hand combat, weapons handling, tactical movement, situational awareness, and most importantly, close-quarters battle techniques that most soldiers never mastered. "Size doesn't matter in CQB," he would tell her as she practiced clearing corners with a wooden training rifle. "Speed, precision, and aggression matter. Most people freeze when violence starts. If you don't freeze, you win." But those lessons were her secret. At the academy, she was just another student struggling through basic tactical training, firearm safety courses, and physical fitness evaluations. She deliberately held back during combat drills, scored average on written exams, and kept her mouth shut during tactical discussions where she could have contributed insights that surpassed her instructor's knowledge. The academy structure reinforced her isolation. Students were ranked based on performance, and those rankings determined everything from dormitory assignments to meal privileges to internship opportunities. Lara maintained a carefully calculated position in the middle of her class, good enough to avoid remedial training, not good enough to draw unwanted attention. Her dormitory roommate, Elena Novak from Slovakia, was one of the few people who didn't seem interested in Lara's family background. Elena was focused on her own goals, graduating with honors and landing a position with a high-profile corporate security firm in London. She treated Lara with polite indifference, which was preferable to the mixture of resentment and false friendship that characterized most of her other relationships. The academy's daily routine was rigid and unforgiving. Reveille at 0530, followed by physical training, classroom instruction, practical exercises, and evening study periods that stretched until 2,200 hours. Students were expected to maintain their equipment, their quarters, and their academic standing without assistance or complaint. Lara navigated this routine with the mechanical precision her father had instilled in her, but inside she felt like she was slowly suffocating. Every day brought new reminders that her classmates and instructors saw her as either a threat to be neutralized or a disappointment to be pitied. She was too associated with privilege to be trusted by students from working-class backgrounds, too unconventional to be accepted by those from military families, and too quiet to be understood by anyone. As she stood in the courtyard that sunny morning, waiting for the day's training exercise to begin, Lara had no idea that everything was about to change. The final examination period was beginning, and with it would come a test that no amount of classroom preparation could have anticipated. The first indication of how others truly perceived Lara came during advanced tactical movement class, taught by instructor Karol Moravec, a former Prague police SWAT commander whose thick mustache and permanent scowl suggested that he'd never met a student who impressed him. The morning's exercise involved small unit tactics in an urban environment, using the academy's elaborate training facility that replicated a typical European city block. Petrova, Moravec announced as he divided the 30-student class into teams of 5. "You're with Team Charlie." His tone carried the subtle dismissal that Lara had learned to recognize, the assumption that she was being placed where she could do the least damage. Team Charlie consisted of students who were considered adequate but unremarkable. There was Tomas Svoboda, a earnest Czech student whose father ran a small security company in Bro; Marie Dubois from France, who spoke excellent English but struggled with the physical demands of training; Alexander Kowalski from Poland, who was intelligent but lacked confidence in high-pressure situations; and finally, Dmitry Volkov from Russia, whose academic performance was strong, but whose practical skills lagged behind his theoretical knowledge. In contrast, Team Alpha, the group everyone knew would lead the exercise, consisted of the academy's top performers. Eric Lindström from Sweden, who stood 6'3" and had completed mandatory military service before enrolling; Sarah Mitchell from Britain, whose father was a retired SAS operator and who never let anyone forget it; Marcus Weber from Germany, who had trained with GSG-9 before deciding on a private security career. These were the students who received the challenging assignments, the advanced training opportunities, and the recommendation letters that led to prestigious job placements. Today's scenario, Moravec continued, consulting his clipboard, involves a hostage rescue in a multi-story building. Team Alpha will serve as the primary assault element. Teams Bravo and Charlie will provide perimeter security and ensure no hostiles escape the target area. Lara felt the familiar sting of being relegated to a support role. Perimeter security meant standing around watching other people demonstrate their skills. It meant being considered suitable for basic tasks, but not trusted with anything requiring real tactical knowledge. She glanced at her teammates and saw resignation on their faces. They'd all been assigned similar roles before. The training facility's urban mock-up was impressive, featuring a 3-story building with multiple entry points, stairwells, and rooms that could be reconfigured for different scenarios. Hidden speakers could provide audio cues, and civilian role-players added realism to hostage situations. It was as close to real tactical operations as training could provide. As the teams moved into position, Lara found herself studying the building with eyes her father had trained. She automatically identified potential sniper positions, likely escape routes, and tactical advantages that could be exploited by either attackers or defenders. The layout reminded her of a warehouse in Kosovo where her father had once conducted an operation. He'd told her about it years later. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Using it as a teaching example about the importance of understanding your environment. Petrova, you're posted. At the southeast corner, Moravec instructed through his radio. Watch for anyone trying to escape through the service entrance. Do not engage unless specifically ordered. Do not engage. The words stung more than Lara cared to admit. She was being positioned as a passive observer, trusted to watch but not to act. Meanwhile, she could hear Team Alpha coordinating their assault through the radio chatter, their voices confident and professional as they planned their approach. Exercise began with Team Alpha stacking at the main entrance, their movements textbook perfect but predictable. Lara watched through her binoculars as they breached the door and disappeared into the building. Through the radio, she could hear their progress. First floor clear, moving to second level. Contact front, engaging hostile targets. Hostage. Located, requires medical attention. But something was wrong. Lara's training allowed her to hear what others missed. The slight delay in Team Alpha's responses. The subtle strain in their voices that suggested they were encountering more resistance than expected. The scenario had clearly been designed to challenge even the Academy's best students. Team Charlie, hold position, came Moravec's voice. Team Alpha has the situation under control, except they didn't. Lara could tell from the radio traffic that Team Alpha was struggling. They'd encountered multiple hostile role players and were having difficulty maintaining momentum while protecting the hostage. The exercise was designed to test their ability to adapt when their initial plan met unexpected resistance, but they were falling back on textbook procedures that weren't quite adequate for the scenario's complexity. Lara found herself mentally running through alternative approaches. The service entrance she was monitoring could provide a flanking route that would allow a small team to reach the hostage from an unexpected direction. The building's ventilation system, visible through external access panels, offered another potential infiltration route. There were at least 3 tactical approaches that could resolve the situation more efficiently than Team Alpha's frontal assault. But she was Team Charlie. Perimeter security. Do not engage unless ordered. Petrova. Report, came Moravec's voice. Southeast perimeter clear, no movement observed, she replied, maintaining her professional tone while internally cataloging all the tactical opportunities being missed. Through her earpiece, she heard Team Alpha finally complete their mission. But their execution had been slower and more chaotic than necessary. Several hostages had been declared casualties due to delayed rescue, and multiple team members had been marked as wounded by the exercise controllers. During the debrief, Moravec praised Team Alpha's persistence while noting areas for improvement. Teams Bravo and Charlie received perfunctory acknowledgement for maintaining perimeter security. No one asked for Lara's observations about the exercise, despite the fact that her position had given her the best overview of the entire operation. As the teams cleaned their equipment and prepared for the next class, Lara overheard Eric Lindstrom talking to Sarah Mitchell. The scenarios are getting more complex. Good thing they keep the support team simple. Can you imagine trying to coordinate with Petrova and her crew during something that complicated? Sarah laughed. Military brat privilege gets you into the academy, but it doesn't make you a tactical operator. Some people just aren't cut out for the advanced stuff. Lara continued cleaning her rifle, her movements methodical and precise. She'd heard variations of this conversation dozens of times. Her classmates had decided who she was based on assumptions about her background, her abilities, and her potential contributions. They saw her father's name and concluded that she was either riding on his reputation or failing to live up to it. What they didn't see was the thousands of hours of training That had started when she was 7 years old. They didn't know about the scenarios her father had drilled into her, the tactical problems he'd made her solve, or the real-world experience he'd shared through stories and lessons that went far beyond anything taught at the academy. As she walked back to the dormitory that afternoon, Lara reflected on the growing gap between her actual capabilities and her perceived role within the academy's hierarchy. She was being systematically excluded from advanced training opportunities, complex scenarios, and leadership positions based on assumptions that had nothing to do with her actual skills. But perhaps that was for the best. Her father had always taught her that the most dangerous opponent was the one who was underestimated. At the Prague Security Academy, she was becoming exactly that kind of opponent, invisible, dismissed, and far more capable than anyone realized. The pattern of exclusion became more pronounced as the semester progressed into its final phase. Advanced Tactical Leadership was the Academy's most coveted course, limited to 20 students selected based on performance metrics and instructor recommendations. When the acceptance letters were distributed on a gray Tuesday morning in November, Lara wasn't surprised to find her name absent from the list. Eric Lindstrom made sure everyone knew he'd been selected, waving his acceptance letter in the mess hall while discussing the course's prestige with Sarah Mitchell and Marcus Weber. "It's invitation only," he announced to their table, his voice carrying across the dining area. "They only take students with real leadership potential." Lara sat 3 tables away with Elena and a few other middle-tier students, mechanically eating her breakfast while listening to the conversation she wasn't supposed to overhear. The Advanced Tactical Leadership course would cover hostage negotiation, multi-team coordination, and complex scenario planning. Exactly the kind of training that separated academy graduates from those who merely completed the basic program. "I heard Petrova applied," whispered Jana Novotna, a Czech student who had never spoken directly to Lara, but seemed to enjoy discussing her. "Can you imagine? Military brat thinks daddy's reputation gets her into advanced courses." Elena glanced at Lara, noting the slight tightening around her eyes. "Maybe she's qualified," Elena said quietly, though her tone suggested she didn't quite believe it herself. "For what?" Jana replied, "Standing around looking serious? Anyone can do that." The exclusion extended beyond course selections. When instructor Moravik organized mock protection details for visiting VIPs, Lara found herself assigned to equipment management while other students rotated through roles as team leaders, advanced scouts, and close protection specialists. During firearms training, she was consistently grouped with students who struggled with basic marksmanship. Despite the fact that her scores exceeded those of many advanced students, the most painful exclusion came during combat medical training. Taught by Dr. Helena Svoboda, a former military physician who had served with Czech forces in Afghanistan. The course involved high-stress scenarios where students had to provide medical care while under simulated fire, requiring both technical knowledge and the ability to function under extreme pressure. Dr. Svoboda divided the class into pairs for trauma care scenarios. Lara found herself partnered with Dmitry Volkov, the Russian student whose academic performance was strong, but who visibly panicked during practical exercises. Meanwhile, the top-tier students were paired together, creating teams that could push each other to higher performance levels. Today we're simulating combat medical care in an active shooter situation, Dr. Svoboda announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had performed these procedures under actual fire. "One partner will be the wounded soldier. The other will provide care while I provide audio effects simulating ongoing combat." Lara and Dmitry were assigned to treat a simulated chest wound, a scenario that required rapid decision-making and precise technique. As Dr. Svoboda activated the sound system filling the training room with the crack of simulated gunfire and shouted commands, Dmitry immediately began to hyperventilate. "I can't. The noise," he stammered, his hands shaking as he attempted to assess Lara's simulated wound. Lara found herself in the strange position of having to calm her partner, while pretending to be unconscious. Through barely opened eyes, she could see his technique deteriorating under pressure, his movements becoming erratic and ineffective. If this had been a real situation, she would have died from treatable wounds. Meanwhile, at the other end of the room, Eric and Sarah worked together with textbook precision, their movements confident and coordinated despite the chaotic audio environment. Dr. Svoboda nodded approvingly as she observed their technique, making notes on her evaluation sheet. When the exercise ended, Dmitri was visibly shaken. "I'm sorry," he said to Lara as they cleaned up their equipment. "I know I messed up. You would have been better with one of the advanced students." "You did fine," Lara replied automatically, though they both knew it wasn't true. She'd spent the entire exercise fighting the urge to break character and provide the medical care herself. Her father had trained her in combat medicine from the age of 14, teaching her to function under pressure that made the Academy's simulation seem gentle. During the debrief, Dr. Svoboda praised the top-performing pairs while offering constructive criticism to those who had struggled. "Medical care under fire requires mental discipline as much as technical skill," she explained. "Some of you have natural composure under pressure. Others will need to develop it through practice." Lara caught the implication. She and Dmitri were categorized among those who would need extensive practice, despite the fact that her own performance had been limited by her partner's panic and her role as the simulated casualty. The evaluation would go into her file as a developmental area, further cementing her position among the Academy's middle-tier students. After class, she overheard Marcus Weber talking to one of his friends. "Thank God I didn't get stuck with Petrova." Can you imagine trying to save someone's life while your partner's having a meltdown? Some people just aren't cut out for high-pressure situations. The irony was almost laughable. Lara had been performing under pressure since childhood, but the Academy's system made it impossible for her to demonstrate those capabilities. She was trapped in a cycle where mediocre partners led to mediocre evaluations, which led to assignment with more mediocre partners. That evening, she found herself alone in the dormitory's common room, studying tactical medicine texts that went far beyond the Academy's curriculum. Elena found her there at midnight, surrounded by advanced trauma care manuals and military medical protocols. "Why do you do that to yourself?" Elena asked, settling into a nearby chair. "You study harder than anyone here, but it never seems to help your evaluations." Lara looked up from her book, considering how to answer. "My father always said that training harder than necessary means you're prepared for anything. But it's not changing how people see you here," Elena pointed out. "Maybe you should focus on what will actually improve your standing." Elena meant well, but she didn't understand. Lara wasn't studying advanced medical procedures to improve her academic standing. She was studying them because lives might depend on that knowledge someday. The Academy treated tactical training as academic exercise, but her father had taught her to approach it as preparation for real-world life-or-death situations. As she returned to her books, Lara reflected on the growing pattern of exclusion that characterized her Academy experience. She was systematically denied opportunities to demonstrate her capabilities, then criticized for not demonstrating capabilities she'd never been allowed to show. It was a perfect system for maintaining existing hierarchies while ensuring that unconventional students remained marginalized, but exclusion also meant invisibility, and invisibility could be an advantage. While her classmates competed for recognition and advancement, Lara was developing skills and knowledge that would serve her long after graduation. The Academy might not recognize her potential, but that didn't make the potential any less real. The whispered doubts about Lara intensified during the week leading up to final examinations. Students were stressed, competitive, and looking for ways to explain why some of their classmates might have advantages they didn't possess. Lara's Surname made her an easy target for speculation and resentment. It started in the dormitory laundry room, where conversations often turned personal due to the forced intimacy of shared domestic chores. Lara was folding her training uniforms when she heard her name mentioned by two students from the advanced track who were using the machines nearby. "I'm just saying, it's convenient that Petrova has access to military resources that the rest of us don't," said Ingrid Hansen, a Norwegian student whose father worked in private security for oil companies. "How do we know she's not getting extra coaching from her daddy?" "Exactly," replied Philippe Moreau, a French student who had struggled with the academy's physical fitness requirements. "Some of us are here on our own merit, without family connections to fall back on." Lara continued folding her clothes, her movements deliberate and calm despite the anger building in her chest. The accusation was particularly galling because it was the opposite of the truth. Her father had deliberately avoided giving her any obvious advantages, insisting that she prove herself independently. Their training sessions had been secret specifically to prevent accusations of favoritism. "Plus, military brats have a different mentality," Ingrid continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "They're used to getting special treatment on bases. They don't understand what it's like to earn things the hard way." The irony was staggering. Lara had moved 18 times during her childhood, never staying in one place long enough to form lasting friendships, never able to rely on social connections or familiar environments. She'd learned to adapt to new situations constantly, to prove herself repeatedly to new groups of people who initially saw her as an outsider. Felipe nodded, knowingly. "And they have this attitude, you know, like they're entitled to respect because of their family background. It's probably why she struggles with teamwork. She expects people to follow her lead automatically." Lara had never expected anyone to follow her lead. In fact, she'd spent most of her time at the academy deliberately avoiding leadership roles because she knew her suggestions would be met with suspicion. She'd learned to keep her tactical insights to herself, to let others make decisions, even when she could see better alternatives. The whispered doubts followed her into the classroom, where even instructors seemed to view her through the lens of assumptions about military families. During strategic planning class, Professor Jan Kurji asked students to analyze a complex security scenario involving multiple threat vectors and competing priorities. Lara raised her hand to offer an observation about the scenario's geographical constraints, drawing on knowledge she'd gained from studying dozens of similar situations with her father. Before she could speak, Professor Krugge held up a hand to stop her. "Let's hear from students who haven't had the benefit of family military experience first," he said, his tone suggesting fairness while actually reinforcing the assumption that any insights Lara might offer were somehow illegitimate. Eric Lindstrom immediately jumped in with an analysis that was technically correct, but missed several key tactical considerations. Sarah Mitchell followed with observations that demonstrated solid academic knowledge, but lacked practical understanding of how such operations actually unfolded. Other students contributed their thoughts, building a collective analysis that was adequate but incomplete. Finally, Professor Krugge turned to Lara. "Now, Miss Petrova, would you like to add anything from your family perspective?" The phrasing made her insights sound like inherited opinions rather than analytical conclusions. Lara offered a brief comment about supply line vulnerabilities, keeping her observation deliberately general rather than revealing the depth of her understanding. Even this modest contribution was met with skeptical glances from her classmates. After class, she overheard Marie Dubuis talking to another student. "It's not fair that some people get private tutoring from military professionals. The rest of us have to figure things out on our own." The assumption that her father was actively coaching her through the academy had become accepted fact among many students, despite being completely false. Colonel Petrov had made it clear that once Lara entered the academy, she was on her own. Their last conversation before her enrollment had been brief and direct. "I taught you what I could. Now prove that you learned it." The doubts extended beyond academics into social situations. During a rare evening when students gathered in the common room to watch a movie, Lara found herself sitting slightly apart from the main group. The film was an action thriller featuring military special operations, and the other students provided running commentary throughout. "That's not how real operators move," declared Marcus Weber during a combat sequence. "My uncle was with KSK, and he says, Hollywood gets everything wrong. Military consultants help with the realistic stuff though," added Sarah Mitchell. "They bring in actual soldiers to train the actors." "Some actors," said Eric with a meaningful glance toward Lara, "probably get that kind of training at home." The comment drew chuckles from several students, but Lara noticed that Alina looked uncomfortable. Later, as they walked back to their dormitory room, Alina finally addressed what had become an unspoken tension between them. "Do you want to talk about what people are saying?" Alina asked carefully. "What are they saying?" Lara replied, though. She knew exactly what Alina meant. That you have advantages the rest of us don't have. That your father helps you with coursework. That you're not really earning your place here the same way everyone else is. Lara sat on her narrow dormitory bed, considering how to respond. The truth was that her father's training gave her enormous advantages, but not in the way her classmates assumed. She didn't receive help with academy coursework. She was forbidden from even discussing her classes with her father. But she did possess knowledge and skills that far exceeded the academy's curriculum. "My father taught me things when I was younger," she said finally. "But since I've been here, I'm on my own, just like everyone else." Alina studied her roommate's face, looking for deception or defensiveness. "People think you're hiding something, that you're not as ordinary as you pretend to be." The word ordinary hung in the air between them. Alina had inadvertently identified the core issue. Lara was indeed hiding something, but not what. Her classmates suspected. She wasn't concealing unfair advantages or ongoing family assistance. She was concealing capabilities that would have fundamentally changed how others perceived her. "Maybe," Lara said quietly, "ordinary is what people need me to be." That night, as Alina slept in the adjacent bed, Lara stared at the ceiling and thought about the web of assumptions and resentments that had formed around her. Her classmates had created a narrative that explained her presence at the academy in ways that made them feel better about their own struggles. She was either a privileged military brat coasting on family connections, or a disappointment failing to live up to her father's reputation. Neither narrative allowed for the possibility that she might be exactly what she appeared to be, a competent student working hard to prove herself. But perhaps that was for the best. The whispered doubts created distance, and distance created freedom to prepare for challenges that others couldn't imagine. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Lara reflected on something her father had told her years earlier. People will always try to explain your success in ways that don't threaten their own self-image. Let them. Their assumptions become your armor. While her classmates focused on memorizing academy protocols and competing for instructor approval, Lara pursued a different kind of education in the shadows of her official curriculum. Every night after mandatory lights out, she would wait until Alina's breathing became deep and regular, then quietly slip out of their dormitory room to continue training that had nothing to do with her academy coursework. The academy's basement levels contained storage areas and maintenance corridors that were rarely patrolled after midnight. Lara had discovered these spaces during her first month, initially exploring them out of curiosity, but gradually recognizing their potential as private training areas. The sub-basement beneath the gymnasium was particularly useful, a maze of old rooms that had once housed military equipment when the building served as an active fortress. Her father had taught her that Real tactical skills could only be developed through constant practice under realistic conditions. Academy training was valuable but limited, focused on textbook scenarios and standardized responses. The kind of situations that actually required tactical intervention were chaotic, unpredictable, and demanded instantaneous decision-making based on incomplete information. So Lara created her own training scenarios. Using furniture from storage rooms, she constructed mock environments that forced her to practice room clearance techniques, close quarters combat, and tactical movement in confined spaces. She memorized the Academy's entire layout, timing herself as she moved through different routes while maintaining noise discipline that would prevent discovery. The CQB techniques her father had drilled into her required constant refinement. Every night, she practiced weapon transitions, malfunction clearances, and combat shooting positions using a deactivated training pistol she'd borrowed from the Academy's equipment room. Her movements became fluid and automatic, muscle memory, developed through thousands of repetitions performed in darkness and silence. Physical conditioning was equally important. The Academy's fitness program was adequate for general security work, but Lara knew that real tactical situations demanded reserves of strength and endurance that went far beyond minimum standards. She supplemented the official training with her own regimen, performing bodyweight exercises in maintenance corridors and stairwell climbs that pushed her cardiovascular system to its limits. Her father had emphasized the importance of tactical medicine, and Lara had continued developing those skills through careful study and improvised practice. Using medical textbooks acquired during weekend trips to Prague's university district, she learned advanced trauma care techniques that wouldn't be covered until the Academy's final semester. She practiced procedures on mannequins borrowed from the medical training facility, returning them before dawn to avoid detection. The most challenging aspect of her secret preparation was weapons familiarity. The Academy provided limited exposure to different weapon systems, focusing primarily on standard-issue handguns and basic rifle platforms. But Lara knew that real-world situations might involve unfamiliar weapons taken from opponents or found in crisis environments. During authorized training sessions, she paid careful attention to every weapon system demonstrated by instructors, mentally cataloging operation procedures, common malfunctions, and field stripping techniques. She studied technical manuals for dozens of firearms that weren't part of the Academy curriculum, memorizing specifications and operational characteristics that might prove crucial in emergency situations. Her tactical knowledge extended beyond individual skills to broader operational planning. Using detailed maps of Prague and surrounding areas, she conducted theoretical exercises in route planning, safe house identification, and emergency extraction procedures. She studied the city's infrastructure, identifying vulnerable points and potential defensive positions that could be relevant in various crisis scenarios. The preparation wasn't limited to physical skills. Her father had taught her that tactical operations were fundamentally psychological challenges, requiring the ability to maintain rational decision-making under extreme stress. Lara developed mental conditioning exercises that she practiced during her nocturnal training sessions, forcing herself to solve complex problems. While performing physically demanding tasks, she created scenarios where she had to memorize detailed information while navigating the basement corridors in complete darkness, then recall that information accurately while performing combat drills. These exercises built the kind of mental resilience that separated competent security professionals from those who crumbled under pressure. Language skills were another area of secret development. Prague's international nature meant that tactical situations might involve people speaking various languages, and effective communication could be the difference between successful resolution and catastrophic failure. Lara used language learning software to improve her fluency in German, Russian, and Arabic, focusing on tactical vocabulary and emergency phrases. Her preparation extended to understanding criminal psychology and terrorist tactics, using online resources and library research. She studied case studies of hostage situations, active shooter incidents, and terrorist attacks. She analyzed what had worked and what had failed in each situation, building a mental database of tactical lessons that supplemented her practical training. The most difficult aspect of her secret preparation was maintaining complete operational security. Elena never suspected that her roommate left their room every night, and instructors never noticed the slight fatigue that resulted from sleeping only 4 hours per night. Lara had learned to function effectively on minimal rest, another skill her father had considered essential for tactical operations. She covered her tracks meticulously, ensuring that borrowed equipment was returned exactly as found and that her training areas showed no evidence of use. The basement corridors became familiar territory, mapped in her mind with the precision of someone who might need to navigate them under emergency conditions. As final examinations approached, Lara's secret preparation reached a new level of intensity. She could feel that something was building, a sense that all her hidden training was leading toward a moment when theoretical preparation would become practical necessity. Her father had taught her to trust such instincts, to recognize when environmental factors were aligning in ways that suggested significant events were approaching. The Academy's security protocols were standard for educational institutions, designed to prevent unauthorized access and maintain order during normal operations. But Lara had studied those protocols from a different perspective, identifying their limitations and potential vulnerabilities. She understood how security systems worked, but more importantly, she understood how they might fail. Her classmates were focused on passing examinations and securing good job placements after graduation. They studied curriculum materials and practiced standard procedures, preparing for careers in conventional security roles. None of them suspected that their overlooked colleague was preparing for scenarios that went far beyond academy training, developing capabilities that would have amazed their instructors and terrified their classmates. The secret preparation was nearly complete. Months of nocturnal training had transformed theoretical knowledge into instinctive capability. Lara had become exactly what her father had intended, a tactical operator disguised as an ordinary security student, invisible until the moment when invisibility became the most dangerous thing imaginable. The confrontation came on a cold December morning when Lara was summoned to the office of Academy Director Colonel František Novak, a stern man whose military bearing had never softened despite 15 years in civilian education. The summons arrived during her strategic planning class, delivered by a nervous administrative assistant who whispered that the director wanted to see her immediately. Lara's heart hammered as she walked through the Academy's administrative corridor, past photographs of distinguished graduates and plaques commemorating notable achievements. She mentally reviewed her activities from the past week, searching for anything that might have attracted unwanted attention. Her nocturnal training sessions had been particularly intensive as final examinations approached, but she'd been careful. To maintain operational security, Director Novak's office occupied a corner of the building's main administrative floor, its windows offering a commanding view of the courtyard where students conducted physical training. The office itself reflected its occupants' military background, precisely arranged furniture, walls lined with commendations and operational maps, and a desk kept so clean it might have been prepared for inspection. "Sit down, Miss Petrova, Director," Novak said without looking up from a file folder that Lara recognized as her student record. His tone was neutral but carried undertones that suggested this wasn't a routine meeting. Lara took the indicated chair, maintaining the posture her father had drilled into her since childhood. Straight back, hands placed naturally, eyes forward but not staring. She waited for Novak to speak first, understanding that this conversation would be a form of tactical engagement where patience and careful responses were crucial. "Your academic performance has been consistent," Novak began, finally looking up from her file. Not exceptional, but adequate. Your practical evaluations place you solidly in the middle tier of your class. However, several instructors have raised concerns about your extracurricular activities. The phrase extracurricular activities hung in the air like an accusation. Lara kept her expression neutral while her mind raced through possibilities. Had someone observed her training sessions? Had equipment been found out of place? Or was this about something else entirely? Could you elaborate on those concerns? Sir, she asked carefully. Novak leaned back in his chair, studying her with eyes that had evaluated thousands of students over his career. You've been accessing academy resources outside normal hours. The library logs show you checking out advanced tactical manuals that aren't part of your curriculum. The gymnasium's equipment room has items signed out to you for extended periods. Relief flooded through Lara as she realized the scope of the investigation. They knew about her extra studying and equipment use, but not about her nocturnal training sessions. She could work with this level of scrutiny. I believe in thorough preparation, sir, she replied. I want to be as qualified as possible when I graduate. Thorough preparation for what, exactly? Novak's question carried weight that suggested he suspected the answer might be problematic. Your career track indicates interest in corporate security and asset protection. Why are you studying counterterrorism procedures and advanced combat medicine? The question revealed the real concern. Academy administrators were worried that she was preparing for activities beyond conventional security work, possibly indicating inappropriate ambitions or unrealistic expectations about her future career prospects. Knowledge of advanced procedures makes me a better security professional, sir, Lara said. Corporate clients expect comprehensive protection, and that requires understanding all potential threat scenarios. Novak consulted her file again, clearly reviewing notes from instructor meetings. Several faculty members have expressed concern about your focus areas. Professor Crevier reports that you ask questions about operational planning that exceed the scope of his courses. Dr. Svoboda says you demonstrate familiarity with medical procedures that aren't taught until advanced levels. Lara felt the trap closing around her. Her extra preparation was being interpreted as evidence of either inappropriate assistance from her father or unrealistic ambitions about her future role in the security field. Both explanations positioned her as a problem to be managed rather than a student to be developed. I study independently because I want to excel in my chosen profession. Sir, she said, maintaining her respectful tone while internally calculating how much truth she could safely reveal. And where does this independent study take place? Novak asked, his question sharp enough to suggest he suspected the answer might be problematic. The library, sir. My dormitory room. Occasionally the common areas when they're not busy. This was technically true, though it omitted the extensive practical training she conducted in the academy's basement levels. Novak seemed to accept the response, but his next question indicated that the conversation was moving into more dangerous territory. Miss Petrova, are you receiving assistance with your studies from external sources? Specifically, are you being coached by family members with military experience? The direct question hung between them like a challenge. Lara understood that her answer would determine how the academy administration viewed her for the remainder of her time here, and possibly influence the recommendations that would affect her post-graduation opportunities. No, sir, she replied. Firmly, my father made it clear that my academy experience must be independent. We don't discuss my coursework or training. This was completely truthful, but it skirted the larger truth about her father's earlier training. Novak studied her response, clearly weighing its credibility against the concerns that had prompted this meeting. The issue, Miss Petrova, is that several instructors feel your preparation and knowledge base exceed what would be expected from independent study alone. This creates questions about the equity of your academic standing relative to other students. Lara felt anger building but kept it carefully controlled. She was being penalized for working harder than her classmates, for taking her education more seriously than students who were satisfied with minimum requirements. The Academy's concern wasn't about her performance, it was about her motivation. "I understand the concern, sir," she said carefully. "Would you prefer that I limit my studies to assigned materials only?" The question forced Novak to confront the logical absurdity of his position. He couldn't explicitly forbid a student from studying too hard, but he also couldn't ignore faculty concerns about potential unfair advantages. "What I prefer," he said finally, "is students who understand the appropriate scope of their role and preparation. You're training for private security work, not special operations. Your study focus should reflect realistic career expectations." The message was clear: stay in your lane, accept your limitations, and don't aspire beyond what others consider appropriate for someone in your position. It was exactly the kind of thinking that kept people trapped in narrow roles, prevented from developing their full potential. "I understand, sir," Lara replied. Though understanding and agreeing were different things entirely, Novak closed her file with finality. "I trust we won't need to have this conversation again. Focus on your official coursework, Miss Petrova. Excel within the established parameters, and you'll have a successful career ahead of you." As Lara walked back to her classroom, she reflected on the Academy's message. They wanted students who were competent, but not exceptional, prepared, but not over-prepared, ambitious, but only within carefully defined limits. Her extra preparation was being treated as a character flaw rather than a professional strength. The questioning of her ambition revealed something important about institutional thinking. Excellence was welcomed only when it followed approved pathways and didn't challenge existing hierarchies. Students who exceeded expectations in unexpected ways were problems to be managed rather than assets to be developed. But the meeting also revealed the Academy's limitations. They could monitor her official activities and discourage her extra studying, but they couldn't control what she learned or how she prepared herself for challenges they couldn't imagine. Their narrow view of appropriate ambition would become her advantage when situations arose that demanded capabilities beyond their curriculum. That night, as she lay in her dormitory bed listening to Elena's steady breathing, Lara made a decision. She would comply with the Academy's request to limit her obvious extra preparation, but she would continue her secret training with even greater care. They had questioned her ambition without understanding its true scope, and that misunderstanding would serve her well when the time came to prove what appropriate preparation really meant. Following her meeting with Director Novak, Lara noticed subtle but unmistakable changes in how she was treated throughout the Academy. The questioning of her ambition had apparently been communicated to the faculty, creating a new layer of scrutiny that made her daily existence increasingly uncomfortable. Professor Krajee began dismissing her questions in strategic planning class before she could finish asking them. "Miss Petrova, let's focus on the fundamentals that are actually relevant to your career track," became his standard response whenever she attempted to contribute insights that drew from her extensive private study. Other students noticed the pattern, exchanging knowing glances that suggested they approved of her being kept in her assigned intellectual lane. Dr. Svoboda was more direct in her disapproval. During medical training sessions, she began pairing Lara exclusively with students who struggled with basic procedures, ensuring that any advanced knowledge she possessed couldn't be demonstrated or developed. When Lara attempted to help her partner with a particularly difficult suturing technique, Dr. Svoboda intervened immediately. "Miss Petrova, please limit yourself to the procedures we've covered in class. Your partner needs to develop skills at the appropriate pace, not be overwhelmed by techniques beyond his current level." The reprimand was delivered loudly enough for the entire class to hear, marking Lara as someone who didn't understand proper educational boundaries. The isolation extended beyond formal instruction into social interactions. Students who had previously maintained polite relationships with her began keeping noticeable distance. During meals, conversation would stop when she approached tables, resuming only after she moved on. The message was clear. Her pursuit of excellence, beyond approved parameters, had marked her as someone who didn't respect the academy's social hierarchy. Elena became increasingly uncomfortable with their roommate relationship. She began spending evenings in the common room or visiting other dormitories, returning to their room only when necessary. Their conversations became limited to logistical necessities, lacking the casual friendship that had previously made their living situation pleasant. "People are talking about you," Elena finally said one evening as they prepared for bed. Her voice carried a mixture of concern and distancing that Lara had learned to recognize, the tone people used when they wanted to help but didn't want to be associated with someone considered problematic. "What are they saying now?" Lara asked, though she suspected she already knew. "That you're arrogant. That you think you're better than everyone else because of your family background. That you don't understand your place here." Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. "Some people think you're deliberately trying to make them look bad by doing more than necessary." The accusation stung because it was so fundamentally wrong. Lara had never tried to make anyone look bad. She'd actually worked hard to avoid appearing superior or showing off her capabilities. Her extra preparation was about being ready for challenges that might arise, not about demonstrating superiority over her classmates. "I just want to be prepared," Lara said quietly. "Prepared for what?" Elena's question echoed Director Novak's concerns. "You're going to graduate and work for a security company, just like the rest of us. Why do you need to know things that corporate security guards will never use?" The question revealed how limited Elena's and most students' vision of their future careers really was. They saw security work as a routine job with predictable challenges and standard solutions. They couldn't imagine situations where advanced skills might mean the difference between life and death, where preparation beyond minimum requirements might be the only thing standing between civilians and catastrophe. "You never know what situations might arise," Lara replied, but she could see that Elena didn't understand. To her roommate, Lara's preparation seemed like pointless overachievement, motivated by ego rather than genuine professional commitment. The social isolation became particularly painful during group projects, where students were required to work together on complex scenarios. Lara found herself consistently assigned to groups with struggling students, while the high performers were grouped together in teams that could challenge each other and produce sophisticated analyses. During one such project, a comprehensive security assessment for a fictional corporate headquarters, Lara was grouped with 3 students whose academic performance placed them near the bottom of the class. The assignment required detailed threat analysis, security protocol development, and emergency response planning, exactly the kind of comprehensive challenge that should have showcased her capabilities. Instead, she found herself in the position of trying to guide partners who struggled with basic concepts while being careful not to dominate the project in ways that would be reported back to faculty. Her teammates were content to produce work that met minimum requirements, showing no interest in the kind of thorough analysis that could have made their project exceptional. "Why are you making this so complicated?" asked Pavel Novak, a Czech student who was Director Novak's nephew and had inherited none of his uncle's military bearing. "The professor just wants us to identify basic security measures. You're acting like we're planning to defend Fort Knox." "Comprehensive threat analysis requires considering multiple scenarios," Lara explained patiently. "Real security situations are often more complex than basic training scenarios suggest." "This isn't a real security situation," Pavel replied with the exasperation of someone who thought his teammate was missing obvious points. "It's a class project. We just need to check the boxes and get a passing grade." The exchange crystallized everything that frustrated Lara about the Academy's approach to education. Students were being trained to meet minimum standards rather than excellence, to check boxes rather than develop genuine expertise. They were learning to be adequate rather than exceptional, satisfied with mediocrity rather than driven toward mastery. Her project team produced work that was technically acceptable but lacked the depth and sophistication that would have distinguished it from dozens of similar submissions. When grades were returned, they received a B- that satisfied her teammates but left Lara feeling like she'd participated in exercise in deliberate underachievement. The isolation intensified when instructor Moravec began excluding her from advanced tactical exercises entirely. While other students rotated through leadership roles in complex scenarios, Lara was assigned to equipment maintenance or relegated to observer status. The justification was always the same: focus on your assigned role, develop skills appropriate to your career track, don't try to exceed your designated responsibilities. Some students need to learn their limitations, she overheard Moravec telling another instructor. It's better to be realistic about capabilities than to develop unrealistic expectations about future roles. The comment revealed how her pursuit of excellence had been reframed as inability to accept limitations. Her extra preparation wasn't seen as dedication or professionalism. It was interpreted as arrogance or delusion about her own capabilities. The Academy was systematically teaching her to accept diminished expectations rather than pursue her full potential. As winter deepened and final examinations approached, Lara found herself more isolated than she'd ever been. Her classmates viewed her with suspicion and disapproval. Her instructors treated her as a problem to be managed, and even her roommate had created emotional distance. The pursuit of excellence had become a social liability that marked her as someone who didn't understand proper boundaries. But isolation also brought clarity. Free from the need to maintain social relationships or seek approval from people who had fundamentally misunderstood her motivations, Lara could focus entirely on preparation for challenges that others couldn't imagine. Her secret training intensified as her official social connections withered, creating space for the kind of focused development that would soon prove more valuable than academic popularity. The Academy had isolated her because she refused to accept their limitations. Soon, they would discover what happened when those limitations were tested by reality. The attack began at 14:37 on a Tuesday afternoon in the second week of December, during what should have been the Academy's most secure time period. Final examinations were in progress, with students distributed across multiple buildings taking written tests under strict supervision. The normal training activities had been suspended, creating an atmosphere of quiet concentration that made the first sounds of violence seem surreal and impossible. Lara was in the Academy's main examination hall, working through a comprehensive test on threat assessment protocols. The large room contained 60 students seated at individual desks, proctored by 3 instructors who maintained the kind of silence that made even pencil scratches seem loud. She was halfway through a complex scenario involving embassy security when the first explosion shattered the afternoon quiet. The sound came from the direction of the main entrance, a deep concussive blast that rattled windows and sent ceiling tiles falling onto examination papers. For a moment, everyone in the room froze, their minds struggling to process what they'd just experienced. Academic environments weren't supposed to include explosions. The Prague Security Academy was a school, not a battlefield. Everyone remain calm, announced Professor Kroji, though his voice carried undertones of confusion rather than authority. That was probably a vehicle backfire or construction equipment. Continue with your examinations. But Lara's training recognized what others missed. The sound had been too sharp, too directional, and too powerful for any innocent explanation. Her father had taught her to distinguish between different types of explosions, and this one carried the signature of a deliberately placed charge designed to breach entry points. Someone had just blown open the academy's main entrance. The second explosion came 30 seconds later, this time from the rear of the building. The coordinated timing eliminated any possibility of accident or coincidence. The academy was under attack by people who understood tactical operations, who knew that effective assault required multiple entry points and synchronized timing. Through the examination hall's windows, Lara could see students running across the courtyard in panic, their movements chaotic and directionless. Faculty members were shouting contradictory instructions, some telling students to shelter in place while others directed them toward evacuation routes. The academy's emergency procedures, designed for fires or medical incidents, were proving inadequate for coordinated assault. Lockdown protocol, Professor Krugge announced, finally grasping the situation's seriousness. Everyone move away from windows. Instructors, secure all entrances. But Lara could see through the windows that the lockdown was failing. Armed figures in tactical gear were moving across the courtyard with professional precision, their movements coordinated and purposeful. These weren't random criminals or disorganized terrorists, they were trained operators executing a carefully planned assault. The examination hall's main door burst open, and Dr. Svoboda rushed in, her face pale with panic. "Armed intruders in the building," she announced breathlessly. "Multiple casualties reported. We need to barricade this room immediately." Students began moving furniture against the doors, their actions driven by panic rather than tactical thinking. Lara watched them stack desks and chairs in configurations that would slow but not stop determined attackers. Their barricades were psychological comfort rather than effective defense, the kind of amateur security measures that provided false confidence while offering minimal protection. "The police are on their way," Dr. Svoboda announced, though her voice suggested uncertainty about how much help was coming or when it might arrive. "Everyone stay quiet and keep away from the doors." Through the building's internal communication system, they could hear scattered reports from other areas. Shots fired in the administrative wing. Multiple injured in the gymnasium. Intruders moving toward the dormitory complex. The academy was being systematically cleared by attackers who knew its layout and understood how to control a large facility. Lara found herself in the familiar position of seeing tactical solutions while being surrounded by people who couldn't imagine taking action. The examination hall was a large room with limited exits and no defensive advantages. If the attackers decided to clear this area, the barricaded doors would delay them for perhaps 30 seconds before they breached the room and found 60 helpless targets. But she also recognized opportunity. The attackers were moving methodically through the building, focusing on areas with the highest concentration of people. They would likely clear the administrative areas and dormitories before turning attention to the examination halls, providing a narrow window for action by someone who understood tactical movement and building layouts. "We should evacuate," Lara said quietly to Professor Krugge. "This room is defensible for only a few minutes. We need to move people to more secure areas." "Absolutely not," Krugge replied sharply. "Academy protocol requires shelter in place during security incidents. The police will handle the situation." "But," Lara could hear the police response through windows facing the courtyard, a few patrol cars, whose officers were establishing a perimeter rather than entering the building. They were following standard procedure for active shooter situations, containing the threat while waiting for specialized tactical units that might take 30 minutes to arrive. 30 minutes was an eternity, when measured against what trained attackers could accomplish inside an undefended building. The academy's population was trapped in predictable locations, following lockdown procedures that made them easier rather than harder to find. The attackers had time, position, and initiative, everything they needed to complete whatever objective had brought them here. through the building's fire safety system. Emergency announcements continued. All personnel remain in secure locations. Do not attempt to leave your current position. Police responses in progress. The announcements reinforced the illusion that safety lay in passive waiting, that trained professionals would resolve the situation while potential victims remained helpfully stationary. Lara checked her watch. 14:41. 4 minutes since the first explosion. The attackers would have cleared perhaps a quarter of the building by now, methodically working through areas where resistance was minimal and targets were clustered. The gymnasium had been mentioned in the emergency reports, a large space where students had been taking practical examinations. Now the sight of multiple casualties. Her classmates huddled behind their improvised barricades, some crying quietly, others staring at their phones as if social media updates could somehow change their tactical situation. They were waiting for rescue by people who might not arrive in time, trusting their safety to procedures designed for different kinds of emergencies. Alina caught Lara's eye from across the room, her expression pleading for some kind of reassurance, that everything would be resolved safely. But Lara couldn't offer false comfort when she understood how rapidly their situation was deteriorating. The academy was being systematically cleared by professionals who understood exactly what they were doing. The sounds of gunfire were getting closer. As the sounds of systematic violence moved closer to their location, Lara's mind shifted into the tactical assessment mode her father had drilled into her since childhood. While her classmates focused on the terrifying immediacy of their situation, she began analyzing patterns in the attackers' movement and identifying opportunities that others couldn't see. The emergency radio traffic from Academy Security provided crucial intelligence about the assault structure. 3 separate teams were clearing the building methodically, moving through predetermined routes that suggested detailed advance planning. They weren't random killers or desperate criminals. They were professionals executing a complex operation with specific objectives. Team Alpha has cleared the administrative wing, came a crackling transmission that Lara could hear through Professor Krasiki's emergency radio. Moving to secondary targets in the dormitory complex. Team Bravo completing gymnasium sweep, reported another voice. Casualties secured, moving to examination areas. The terminology revealed everything. These attackers were using military communication protocols and tactical designations that indicated extensive training and preparation. They weren't here to cause random destruction. They were systematically clearing the academy to achieve specific goals, treating the operation like a military objective rather than a terrorist attack. Lara recognized the assault pattern from scenarios her father had described during their training sessions. The attackers had isolated the academy from external assistance, established control over key areas, and were now consolidating their hold on the facility while completing secondary objectives. The methodical approach suggested they intended to remain in control for an extended period. "We need to get out of here," whispered Marcus Weber, who was crouched behind an overturned desk near the room's main entrance. "The police aren't coming fast enough. These guys are going to work their way through the entire building." "Academy protocol requires," Professor Krayi began, but his words were cut off by a burst of automatic weapons fire from somewhere nearby. The sound was sharp and immediate, suggesting the attackers had reached the same floor as the examination hall. Through the windows facing the courtyard, Lara could see the police perimeter that had been established around the academy's main building. Multiple patrol cars, ambulances, and what appeared to be a command vehicle, but no signs of tactical teams preparing for immediate entry. The authorities were following standard protocols for hostage situations, establishing containment while waiting for specialized units, but this wasn't a hostage situation in the conventional sense. The attackers weren't making demands or seeking negotiation. They were executing a predetermined plan that involved clearing the entire facility. The police response, appropriate for traditional barricaded suspects, was inadequate for dealing With professional operators conducting a systematic assault, Lara's tactical analysis identified a critical opportunity. The attackers were moving through the building using standard room-clearing procedures, but they were doing so with confidence born from facing unarmed civilians who posed no tactical threat. They wouldn't be expecting resistance from someone who understood their methods and could exploit their assumptions. The examination hall's layout offered advantages that her classmates couldn't recognize. The room had 3 exits, the main entrance where they'd constructed their barricade, a secondary door leading to a maintenance corridor, and emergency windows that opened onto a service area rarely used by academy personnel. The attackers would expect to find panicked civilians behind the main barricade, not organized resistance using alternative routes. More importantly, Lara knew the academy's basement levels intimately from her months of secret training. The maintenance corridors and storage areas that had served as her private gymnasium could now serve as tactical routes for someone who understood building layout and possessed the skills to exploit it. She could move through areas the attackers hadn't mapped, approaching them from directions they wouldn't anticipate. "Professor Kurji," she said quietly, moving closer to the instructor who was monitoring emergency communications. "I know the building's maintenance systems. I can reach the security office through service corridors and activate emergency protocols that might help people escape." "Absolutely not," Kurji replied immediately. "You're not qualified for that kind of operation. We wait for professional response." But Lara could see that professional response wasn't coming fast enough. The radio traffic indicated that Team Bravo was approaching their section of the building, systematically clearing rooms that contained helpless civilians. Students and faculty were being killed or captured because they were following procedures designed for different types of emergencies. "Sir, I have training that could help," she pressed, knowing that she was revealing capabilities she'd kept hidden throughout her academy experience. "My father taught me tactical movement and building assault procedures. I can do things that might buy time for people to escape." Professor Krugri stared at her with surprise and suspicion. "What kind of training?" "You're a logistics student, not a tactical operator. CQB procedures, room clearing, weapons handling under stress," Lara replied, abandoning the careful mediocrity she'd maintained for 18 months. "I know how to move through hostile environments and engage armed opponents." The admission created a moment of stunned silence among the students who could hear her conversation with Professor Crochet. Elena's eyes widened with shock and something approaching betrayal. Her roommate had been concealing capabilities that completely contradicted everything they'd assumed about her background and limitations. "That's impossible," said Eric Lindstrom from behind his barricade position. "You're barely qualified for basic security work. You can't seriously think you could handle trained attackers." But Sarah Mitchell, whose father's SAS background had given her some understanding of tactical operations, was studying Lara with new interest. "How much training?" she asked quietly. "Enough," Lara replied, knowing that detailed explanations would waste precious time. "I can move through the building without being detected, reach positions where I can observe their operations, and potentially disrupt their plans." The sounds of gunfire were getting closer, accompanied by shouted commands in what sounded like Russian or Eastern European languages. Team Bravo was clearing rooms on their floor, working methodically toward the examination hall where 60 people waited helplessly for rescue that might not arrive in time. "This is insane," Professor Kurji sighed, but his voice carried uncertainty rather than conviction. The official protocols weren't working, and everyone in the room could hear evidence that people were dying while they waited for external assistance. Lara moved toward the maintenance door, her decision crystallizing into action despite the protests. Around her, "I'm going to try," she announced. "Stay here and maintain your barricades, but be ready to evacuate through the emergency windows if you hear sustained gunfire from the corridor." "Petrova, I order you to remain in position, Professor." Kragi called, but his authority seemed ineffective against the reality of their deteriorating situation. "With respect, sir," Lara replied, her hand on the maintenance door's handle. "Your orders aren't going to stop those attackers from reaching this room." As she slipped through the maintenance door into the dimly lit corridor beyond, Lara heard Elena calling her name with a mixture of fear and something that might have been admiration. For 18 months, her roommate had known her as an unremarkable student with mysterious study habits. Now Elena was discovering that she'd been living with someone whose capabilities were about to be tested in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The maintenance corridor was familiar territory, mapped in Lara's mind through months of secret training. But tonight, those training sessions would become operational reality. She was no longer practicing techniques in empty rooms. She was moving through a hostile environment where mistakes would have lethal consequences. Behind her, she could hear the muffled sounds of her classmates maintaining their barricades and following official protocols. Ahead of her lay the kind of challenge her father had trained her to face since childhood. It was time to discover whether years of secret preparation had created a tactical operator, or just a student with unrealistic confidence in her abilities. The sounds of Team Bravo's approach were getting closer. Lara moved deeper into the maintenance areas, heading toward a confrontation that would test everything she thought she knew about herself. Lara struck as Team Bravo passed the storage room doorway, using the fire suppression system to flood the corridor with chemical fog that destroyed their visual advantage while their tactical formation was compressed in the choke point. The lead operator's professional training worked against him. His instinctive response to chemical concealment was to seek cover and establish defensive position, exactly the reaction that gave Lara the tactical initiative. She emerged from concealment as the chemical fog peaked, moving through an environment she'd memorized during months of secret training while her opponents struggled with unexpected conditions. The utility knife found the gap between body armor plates on the lead operator before his tactical training could adapt to threats from directions he hadn't anticipated. The second operator's response was textbook professional immediate radio communication to alert other teams, tactical movement to establish fields of fire, weapon handling that demonstrated extensive combat experience. But textbook responses assumed conventional opponents operating under conventional tactical principles, not someone who understood his methods well enough to exploit them. Lara used the corridor's configuration to prevent effective mutual support, engaging each operator individually rather than facing coordinated fire from multiple directions. Her father's training in close-quarters combat had emphasized using environment and tactical surprise to overcome equipment disadvantages, turning opponents' assumptions against them through unconventional approaches. When the chemical fog cleared, 3 professional attackers were neutralized and their equipment was available to someone who understood how to use it effectively. More importantly, their radio communications had been interrupted, creating confusion among other teams about Team Bravo's status and location. The examination hall's evacuation through emergency windows proceeded smoothly once the immediate threat was eliminated. 60 students who had been trapped behind inadequate barricades reached safety while Teams Alpha and Charlie struggled to understand why their coordinated operation was suddenly experiencing communication failures and tactical complications. Police tactical teams, responding to reports that the threat had been significantly degraded, modified their approach from careful containment to immediate assault. The attackers' extraction timeline was compressed beyond sustainability, forcing them to abandon secondary objectives and attempt emergency withdrawal under increasing pressure. Elena was among the first evacuees to reach the police perimeter, immediately reporting that Lara Petrova had left the examination hall and was doing something in the building. Her description of her roommate's claimed capabilities was met with skepticism until radio Intercepts confirmed that one of the attacking teams had been neutralized by unknown means. "Impossible," declared Incident Commander Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Haffel when briefed on the situation. "Academic personnel don't have tactical training adequate for engaging professional attackers." But impossible was exactly what had happened, and the evidence was undeniable. 3 neutralized attackers, recovered weapons and equipment, and radio traffic, indicating that the assault operation was deteriorating due to unexpected resistance from sources the attackers couldn't identify or counter. Director Novak arrived at the police command post as the situation concluded, his face reflecting confusion about how Academy protocols had been so completely overwhelmed by events that exceeded all planning assumptions. Security Chief Cover followed shortly afterward, his radio communications with Lara having been cut off when she'd moved beyond range of Academy systems. "Where is Specialist Petrova now?" demanded Lieutenant Colonel Haffel, using military rank designation that reflected his assessment of her demonstrated capabilities. "Unknown," replied Cover, his voice carrying embarrassment about losing track of a student whose tactical abilities had been completely misassessed. "She was last reported moving through building maintenance areas." Lara was found 2 hours later in the Academy's security office, using recovered radio equipment to coordinate with police teams clearing the final areas of the building. She had systematically worked through the facility, using her knowledge of maintenance corridors and tactical principles to locate and neutralize remaining threats while establishing communication with responding officers. Her after-action report was delivered with the professional precision of someone trained in operational debriefing procedures. Detailed intelligence about attacker capabilities, equipment inventory, tactical observations about their training and objectives, and recommendations for improving Academy security protocols that revealed sophisticated understanding of facility defense. "Specialist Petrova," Lieutenant Colonel Haffel said when her debriefing concluded, "your actions today were extraordinary. Can you explain how a logistics student acquired tactical capabilities adequate for engaging professional attackers?" "My father taught me, sir," Lara replied simply. Colonel Viktor Petrov believed that preparation should exceed requirements, because you never know what situations might arise. The room fell silent as officers made connections between the legendary Special Operations Commander and the overlooked Academy student whose capabilities had been systematically underestimated for 18 months. The questioning and isolation she'd endured suddenly seemed not just misguided, but dangerously naive. Elena found Lara in the Academy's medical facility, where she was receiving treatment for minor injuries sustained during the engagement. Her roommate's expression mixed relief, amazement, and something approaching awe as she struggled to reconcile the person she'd known with the tactical operator who had emerged during the crisis. "You never said anything," Elena whispered. "All those nights when you studied advanced materials, all those times people criticized your preparation, you never told us what you were really capable of." "They wouldn't have believed it," Lara replied quietly. "And it was better that way. No one expects dangerous capabilities from someone they've dismissed as inadequate." The Academy's response was swift and comprehensive. Lara's student status was immediately modified to reflect advanced tactical training, with course requirements adjusted to match demonstrated capabilities. Faculty who had questioned her ambition and preparation found themselves reassigned to develop new curricula that incorporated lessons learned from actual tactical operations. Professor Krajci requested a private meeting to apologize for dismissing her contributions in strategic planning class. "I should have recognized that your questions came from genuine knowledge rather than theoretical speculation," he admitted. "Your insights could have improved our entire program." But the most significant change was in how other students viewed preparation and capability. Lara's example had demonstrated that excellence beyond minimum requirements wasn't academic overachievement, it was tactical necessity that could mean the difference between life and Death when normal procedures proved inadequate. 6 months later. The Prague Security Academy had been transformed into one of Europe's most respected tactical training institutions, with graduates sought after by police units, military organizations, and private security firms that understood the value of comprehensive preparation. Lara Petrova, now acknowledged as the Academy's most distinguished graduate, accepted a position with an international security firm that specialized in high-risk operations. Her colleagues no longer called her military brat. They called her the operator who had proven that size, background, and institutional recognition mattered less than preparation, capability, and the willingness to act when others couldn't. On her final day at the academy, Alina asked the question that had haunted her since the attack. How did you know you could do it? How did you know your training was adequate for such an extreme situation? Lara's answer was simple and honest. My father always said that you don't train for the situations you expect. You train for the situations you can't imagine. When the unimaginable happens, preparation is the only thing that matters. The Academy's new motto, inscribed on a plaque commemorating the attack's resolution, REFLECTE, lessons learned from underestimating one of their own students. Excellence has no limitations except those we accept. They would never again make the mistake of calling someone a military brat without understanding what that training really meant. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.